Okay, so now I'm returning, and as I mentioned, to be a little bit more coherent on the new imperialism. And I mean by really discussing some aspects more specifically. Um, so, first of all, there was extreme competition between the superpowers, basically carving up the world and competing with each other who gets what in, let's say, Africa as a shining example. And this this should really sink in uh, to your consciousness. I would argue, and we will have time to talk about this later at the end of the chapter, but I won't be able to go over in this class as much, that we have a kind of neo-imperialism that is done quite differently, but goes back to this. And I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mentioned this before, and again, I talked about the sensitivity of the war in Iraq, and so many veterans that are my students and people who have loved ones that's fought there, and some died and had lots of struggle. So again, I realize that's a sensitive topic, but I just want to kind of point out something. We didn't go in to Iraq calling it Operation American Freedom. It was called Operation Iraqi Freedom. I mean, think about it. It's kind of strange, right? In the sense that, like, if you have a war and you're claiming it's justifiable, that you would just say we're gonna go to war with somebody because we think that that will um, make us free. But you'll almost never see that kind of rhetoric coming out of American politician in that way. You, I don't think you would ever see an Operation American Freedom in Iraq, because the idea is that when we do something overseas, it has to be for the good of them, and consequently that means the good of us. So it's not just for the good to us, but the goodness of us gets demonstrated. And that's whether that is the case or not. That is what we have come out rhetorically. I really believe that name, Operation Iraqi Freedom, goes all the way back to the new imperialism. And again, I realize I'm being controversial, but I think I'm actually being historically precise. And I think that you got to admit that there's something to it there as to why it would be called Operation Iraqi Freedom and not called Operation American Freedom. It's this legacy, this idea that, when you read this chapter, it's this belief that there is something inherently good about what the West can do to the world by using even its imperial power. Its imperial conquest and expansion is going to be for the good of them. And in the meantime, what will happen is that in this competition, other superpowers try to outdo the others, and sometimes will highlight the atrocities of others and downplay their own. And sometimes those are used as ruses to, in this great propaganda, great militaristic, strategic, economic game. Okay, it's quite cynical, really. But I want to encourage you to be cynical. Not to be cynical of life, per se. But I really want you to realize that if you read history, if you study history more, what actually happens on the ground, and you just, take what you've learned in this class and you just go with it, you are going to see a very different world than you thought existed. Okay? That's what I'm trying to say. And I don't think there's any way around that. And I'm kind of speaking passionately on it because I think that that's where we're going to see the more possibilities of becoming the world that we actually all claim we want, right? Okay, and that is, again, a little bit my subjective opinion about, on one hand, I'm telling you that, but I don't think that it's subjective to say that the world does not operate the way that we think it does when it comes to just rhetoric of politicians, what you see on the news and the narratives that you get, not just here. And this is not just an American thing. It's not even just a Western thing. But in the West this legacy right here. Okay, and the spread of Christian missions is its legacy is complex as well. On one hand, Christians spread literary reading and writing, and something that's kind of talked about in this text that needs to be highlighted is that around this time, the West is stopping slavery. Okay, I mean, think about it. Britain didn't have a civil war to end slavery like we did. They just ended it. And in Africa, they're actually going to fight the slave trade now. But it's going to be also used as an excuse to have a greater foothold in this imperial colonial game. Because in the East, the Islamic world is going to continue the slave trade. Okay? And now the West can say, oh, look at those uncivilized Muslims, those Arabs that are dominating the poor Africans with the wrong religion and enslaving them, and we're going to come in and we're going to end slavery, we're going to save their souls, and we're going to bring them civilization. Okay, so you see that kind of coming in there. And here's a good example of what kids would be exposed to. W is the word of an Englishman true. When given, it means what he says he will do. And in contrast to what? Right? In that text, you might have seen the poem The White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling, who put together The Jungle Book, that great film, The Jungle Book in Disney, and Rikki Tikki Taffy. You know that story as a kid? You ever watched the cartoon? Okay. The White Man's Burden is one of the most blatantly condescending, what we would now define as pure racism. I mean, the white man's burden. By the way, I was driving to go pick up my daughter in the Bay Area, and I was listening to Michael Savage on AM radio a few years ago, and I listened to all political points of view. He literally read this poem in all seriousness, The White Man's Burden, and he meant it as a positive thing still. Okay? So it's strange. You would think that some of this is so outdated, like, on the other hand, this stuff is still, this rhetoric is bought into. And when we're talking about the scramble for Africa, okay, and the ability to get in there, and that was tampered with, by the way, just to quickly say, bringing in technology that could get them in there, like the steamship, being able to have guns that can kill lots of people, and having things to help them fight diseases they didn't have before. And so what I want to do here is then show you what Africa is going to look like with this. Now look at the Belgium Congo here. And so this leads me to return to something that we have to address in all seriousness, and puts it all together in the story of King Leopold and Belgium. And actually, I'm going to stop this lecture here, and I'm going to devote more time to talking about that in the next lecture.